Hi, everybody. My name is Kris Walker. I am a commercial photographer and fine artist, dealing mostly with photography, but I've been in the business of digital art and creativity for 30 some odd years, designer, illustrator, photographer, the whole thing, ad agency stuff, solo guy, the works. And I was invited to speak about creativity tonight and about how we can think about things in a different way when we're doing creative problem solving and working on an art project possibly. And I called this thinking around the corners because I hate the term thinking outside the box, because that has become such a non-phrase that it doesn't mean anything anymore, right? And so I like the idea of thinking around the corners because you don't know what's there, right? And we're going to talk about exploring and making interesting creative decisions and hopefully helping to, this isn't about how to break creative block, this is about how to do things in all of your creative projects that push things forward. And we're going to talk about looking at it through a different lens. Since I'm a photographer, that's the phrase we're going to use. And there's going to be 4 different ideas that I want to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about play and iteration, restriction, and inspiration. So the first 2, I think, are some of my more important things that for me are what push my creativity further and further. But they all have a place when you're on a project and you're trying to develop the full creative thought process that can help in lots of different ways. So we're going to talk about play, but first we're going to let John Cleese talk about it.
Now, the next factor, number 4, is confidence. When you're in your space-time oasis, getting into the open mode, nothing will stop you being creative so effectively as the fear of making a mistake. Now, if you think about play, you'll see why. True play is experiment. What happens if I do this? What would happen if we did that? What if? The very essence of playfulness is an openness to anything that may happen, a feeling that whatever happens, it's okay. So you cannot be playful if you're frightened that moving in some direction is wrong, something you shouldn't have done. I mean, you're either free to play or you're not. As Alan Watts puts it, you can't be spontaneous within reason. So you've got to risk saying things that are silly and illogical and wrong, and the best way to get the confidence to do that is to know that while you're being creative, nothing is wrong. There's no such thing as a mistake, and any drivel may lead to the breakthrough.
So that, I think, encapsulates one of the most important aspects of the creative process, is that letting go of the fear of making any sort of mistake. Everything is valid, everything works, everything that you start thinking about is a real integral part of the process. And one of the things I wanted to show tonight as part of that is how I developed my latest fine art series, which was called Constructed Chroma. And by day, I am primarily an architectural photographer. So my clients are like Tower Pinkster or AVB, or architects and interior designers and those things. And I got into that because I love the geometry of architecture. I love the lines, I love the shapes. And often when I'm on a shoot, I will see little details of shape that I always found interesting. And I'm like, I want to do something with that shape and make it into something. Right? I want it to be something more than what it is. And so I started this process where I'm like, all right, I'm going to take these and play. Now, I work primarily in digital photography and Photoshop, so that gives me every imaginable tool in the world to do something visual with Photoshop. But This was a photo of the details of an office building downtown Grand Rapids. Don't remember which one. It's somewhere near the DeVos Hall, DeVos Performance Hall. I spent an afternoon there kind of walking around the block with my camera, shooting little vignettes of things. And I said, there's some interesting lines there but when you look at that, you can tell that that's part of a building, right? So the first thing I thought of was, what happens if I rotate it? That changes a little bit of the perspective, pulled in a little tighter. The context of it changes a little bit. Now we start to look at it more as a shape, right? And less about an object. And then I thought, what would happen? What if I flipped it and did a mirror image? And now it becomes even more abstract and interesting. And now these shapes here start to make an entirely different kind of feel. And this is the essence of play and creativity, is asking, what if then I flopped it around this way? And now all of a sudden what we have is we have this original thing that people drive by every day in downtown Grand Rapids, but now they're looking at it in a way that is completely different. And one of the things about building exteriors versus interior design is the exteriors are always like gray and steel and concrete and stuff, whereas the interior has a lot of color. So I thought, okay, what if I started playing with adding weird colors to this shapes and designs that I created? Because then I'm starting to twist what architecture actually looks like. So I tried this one. That color palette was nice, but it was a little, I thought, limited. I wanted to do more. So then I started remapping the colors and the tones in Photoshop. What I did is I told Photoshop, okay, we're gonna have X value be this color and X value be this color and X value be this color. So it starts remapping how the colors are applied. And eventually, this was the final product for this series. And I did there's 20 pieces in the series. It was over actually in the Arts Council, July and August in the gallery. And it all came from the idea of asking, what if, and just playing around, seeing like, okay, what can I do? What's weird? What is wrong? Because in architectural photography, starting off, all my verticals have to be vertical and horizontals have to be, straight. Pointing up at a building is not correct in the technical definition of what I do on every day. So even just starting from the pointing up and creating that convergence in perspective. One of my favorite examples of play, I learned, I was working for an ad agency down in Indiana, Mishawaka, and they had a luncheon, and the worldwide creative director for Ketchum Advertising was there doing this presentation. And they're the ones that like Miller beer and those kind of commercials back in the 90s, right? Big person. So she would tell this story in this presentation, and it was about developing creativity. And she said that she has a rule during their brainstorming meetings when they're working on a new campaign or any sort of project. Everybody in the room gets a Nerf ball. Those real squishy, spongy ones, right? And the first person to edit an idea or to say anything negative, like that won't work, the Nerf ball, the whole room pelts them with the Nerf balls. She said that like she frequently tries to make the first comment like that, and especially the people who have worked for her often know that she's going to do it and they're ready, and they all pelt her with the Nerf balls. But that kind of sets the safety to be able to do that, because if you can throw a Nerf ball at the big boss, right, then you can feel safe saying whatever you want and not worry about somebody going, I don't know about that, that's kind of dumb, right? So it's a playful thing. It's like what John Cleese said, there's no wrong answers, Because sometimes you can be stuck in a brainstorm session and say, what if Santa Claus was riding a surfboard instead, right? And that might not be the best answer, but someone might think about Santa Claus and then the surfboard and then something else and then something else and then something else, and that becomes the answer. So editing and not editing and allowing yourself to play. Allow yourself to have no mistakes, to have just unlimited goofing around. Even doing something dumb and silly can lead you to a more creative, more interesting solution to something. All right, the second thing I want to talk about is iteration. And this is a principle in the creative sphere and in the creative world. I see this most within the design industries, product design, graphic design, web design, some of those things. The idea of iteration is taking one idea and we're going to try this variation and this variation and this variation. A bunch of years ago, I was doing a rebranding for this South Bend, Indiana insurance company. And they needed a new logo update. Their other thing was very stoic and insurance-y, you know? And I said, let's do something a little more different. So I was playing with it, and I did this one, and I did this one, and I did this one, and 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 this one, this one, and this one, and this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, until we finally got to there. There's the final. But their first round of that was 50 different logo designs. Variations of like the same icon and maybe some different type styles, different arrangements like you saw. Sometimes it was multiple variations on this icon. All right, we're going to change it. We're going to maybe stretch it, make it bigger, smaller, thicker, fatter, you know, stuff like that. I think this was in round 2 that we finally got started moving towards this as the final logo. And you notice that start out, everything is in black and white for this, because when you do logo design, color makes a huge difference. So you start out in black and white so you don't influence the color thing. So with the idea of iteration, the process of trying this version and then tweaking it and making another version, then making another version and making another version and stuff like that puts in more time in your brain. And the longer your brain is working on this problem? I can talk. The longer your brain is working on something like this, the more power you give it to find something interesting, the more you can go this way and zigzag and go around to something new and exciting. Now, okay, product design is you know, logo design, that's one area, but you can do this as a writer, you can do this as a painter, you can do this as a ceramicist, you can do it in any form of art or any sort of creative pursuit. The creative director for an ad agency I worked for, his wife was a ceramicist, and when he would like take her classes, he had his little notebook, and he was one of the only people that would start and sketch of the clay works that he would do, and he would do version over version because of his design training, right? So he would do these iterations, and it really did help him get to what was a really nice final product. And it was something that like he would come in and kind of teach like the younger students that were taking at the college, because that wasn't a thing they were used to. So if there is a creative thing that you're working on and you're getting stuck, start, tweak, iteration, do it a little different. What happens if I put this here? What happens? What if? What if? The what if is one of the greatest questions you can ask in any sort of creative pursuit, right? All right. The next one is restrictions.
Does that sound creative to anybody?
Well, actually,
I'm a chef.
Yeah,
And obviously, food is a media of,
yeah,
we were talking about the food photography and stuff.
yeah, yeah.
But I found that creativity is more interesting and more stimulated when you have limited things to work with. Like
Yeah.
limited number of ingredients or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
More creative opportunities than if you have unlimited.
Yeah, exactly. You were going to say something.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Just wanted to piggyback off that.
Yeah.
Filmmaking, I did the same thing. Oftentimes, especially in grad school, we were given like parameters,
Mm-hmm.
and it's often, we see, well, we can tell a story in a shorter amount of time.
Yeah, yeah.
And sometimes, like, one project is like the 32-1 project, we called it.
Mm-hmm.
You have 3 minutes, 2 characters, 1 location.
Right, okay.
And,
Yeah.
So you're forced to get more creative when you have certain parameters.
Exactly. Yeah, and you guys stole the, first quote, is that the enemy of art is the absence of limitations by Orson Welles. And there is, in a general kind of cultural zeitgeist, the idea that creativity means the sky's the limit, right? No matter what. In reality, your brain doesn't get into creative mode until it has something to focus on, until it has some sort of limitation. Debbie Allen, but out of limitations comes creativity. You need to, in any project, you need to have some definitions, right? But if you're working on developing creative thought process or a personal piece or something like that, the idea then is to do some sort of restrictions on what you're working on. Maybe it's a piece that only uses one color and you've got to do the entire painting with a shade of green, right? Since I know that we've got photo and video people in here, and we're used to like our zoom lenses and having our different focal lengths and stuff like that, doing a project with only one lens to where you have to zoom with your feet to get the framing and keeping with that single perspective. Like if you have an 80, for a DSLR, an 80 millimeter lens, right? That's a pretty long lens, focal length. We're gonna have a lot of compressed space, but doing a project in that, with just that one lens, would, like, how am I gonna frame this? What if I do want, really sharp depth of field from forward to back, and I'm using a long lens, which naturally lends itself to like the blurred background look that we see on TV and stuff like that. Or you do everything with a really wide lens. And then when you have to deal with like getting close-ups, and then you got to figure out how do you deal with the distortion that comes in when I get a wide angle lens and I start coming towards your face and your nose starts going like this, right? And another thing that is a really interesting restriction that didn't used to be a restriction now is playing with some analog tech, like film, like not editing in Premiere or something like that, doing like linear editing and stuff like that. My son is a videographer as well, and I invited him over with some of the other kids and we watched Who Framed Roger Rabbit. From the 80s, it was like 84, right? And he's 30 and he's been in the business and it's all digital, so his whole process is digital. And he was commenting, I can't believe they did this on film editing, all of these layers and stuff, right? But when you think about like in Hollywood, the practical effects that they used to have to do because they couldn't just use CGI back in those days, that limitation of like, how can we get this on film and make it look real? That limitation, that restriction created the space for some really interesting problem solving. So give yourself a practice in restricting something of your project, and that's gonna help open up those things. And then the last piece I wanna talk about is inspiration. That's another one of my constructed chroma pieces that is, That one's actually, I believe, the Kalamazoo Public Library from the series. Yeah, I think that's where I got that one from. So when I was when I was doing design and it was time for a logo design, I would often go to the logo design websites and look at a lot of logos. How many video people do we have in here that are like looking for inspiration and you're like looking on Vimeo and stuff like that, right? Right? Yeah, we do that, don't we? And sometimes it's not great. William Faulkner said, "I would rather be inspired by a painter than by another writer." And I heard this many, many years ago, and it really stuck in my brain for some reason, because I was in that mode of constantly looking at other people's work in my field and trying to pull from it, right? And so the idea in this creative process that I want you to think about is, where else can I find inspiration besides right in my field? I don't know how many of you have gotten in the last few years to go see the West Michigan Area Show at the Kalamazoo Institute of Art. If you haven't, the next year, it's a yearly show, you need to go see it. And one of the great things about this show is that it is entirely full of all art, right? You will find paintings and drawings and sculpture and fabric work and pottery and assemblage and everything. And so this is a really wonderful space to go and get your creative juices just really, saturated with interesting ideas, things visually and auditory and everything. This was Vicki Nelson's piece from last year, 2000. And I remember I walked in, and this piece is about the size of like a movie poster, right? This painting. I walked in, it was one of the first things I saw. And at first, I kind of like walked past it for a second, and then I started looking at it, and I'm looking at it, and I started imagining, what is the story behind this picture? Is this a funeral? Is this, celebrating a birthday? I want to know. And this looks like it's people from like my grandparents' generation, the style of what they're wearing, I'm in my 50s, so, my grandparents were World War II generation. And it got my brain like immediately, like, I want to know this story. I want to make up a story for this, right? And so this for me, was a really wonderful example of finding inspiration in something other than my own medium. There's another interesting thing that this is the weirdest word, ekphrastic poetry. I don't know if anyone has ever heard of that, but it is a poetry practice where poets and artists often work together. The artist will paint something visual, and then the poet will take that visual and write something from it. And now often it's the visual to the words, but like in this setting where we're at the Public Media Network and we've got video and stuff like that, what story can you think of how would you tell this story in video? These words. How would you bring this poem to life with film? Would you use actors? Would it be all B-roll? What would it be? There's interesting play between LED and bed straw, and there's so much in here that haystacks and LEDs, like sackcloth, what's the combination of those two things, right? So finding the inspiration from words to visual, from visual in one aspect to visual in another aspect, is a big part of breaking out of that same moldness that we often do within all creative arts. I know painters that do the same thing. I know potters that do it all, fiber arts. It is a process of creative people to look at things in the same vein and try and find inspiration. So that's the last part of the idea of looking through these processes through a different lens, thinking around the corners, play and iterate and restrict and find different inspiration. And as you go through this process, your creative processes will change and develop in new and hopefully interesting ways. So, any questions?
Has your process of creativity evolved as you've gotten older? Like
Yes.
When you were younger, in your 20s, you may think this is what it means to be creative, and now.
Absolutely. In a lot of ways, actually. I remember I suspected I was ADHD when I was in my 30s, and I was worried that if I got on meds, that it would make me less creative, because my brain was always thinking in weird ways, and so I didn't get on meds, right? But I had a hard time staying on task. And now that I'm on meds, I'm still creative, but I can get through stuff. And that reminds me of a quote that I saw in a design magazine many years ago. I can't remember who said it, but the article was called Creative Adults. And the writer said, the difference between an immature creative and a creative adult is that when we found a cure for cancer, the creative adult knows that the best thing to do is a full-page newspaper ad with the headline, "We found the cure for cancer," in 62-point Helvetica with a white background. You know, and it took me a little bit to think about that, you know, but the idea of sometimes what you need is being direct was a turning point for my creative process. And technology has changed my creative process a lot as well over the years. So, you know, I started out doing film, you know, and I remember we did one shoot for Selmer Musical Instruments, and it was 12, I think, of the stringed instruments from their littlest violin to their biggest double bass. And they all needed to be standing in front of this painted backdrop, upright, lined up like this in order of height, evenly spaced. And I had to figure out how to do that without the aid of Photoshop so that you couldn't see any of the wires or supports or anything. And it took me the better part of a day and a half to get that all rigged up to where you couldn't see anything, because this was film days, you know. And now, like, I would shoot each one of those individually on the floor and look down on it, and then I would just stand them up straight, line them up, you know, hit auto align, and then throw them in a backdrop on a green screen, right? So yeah, the technology has changed my process a lot too, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of which, so obviously AI.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you reflect a little bit about the whole AI is in the mix now and
Yeah.
how that's going to impact.
So that can be kind of a touchy subject, you know. There are a lot of things that are moving faster than, like, the engineers are moving faster than we can react to a lot of things. And a lot of things got to the point that they are before we even know that they were happening. You know, most of the generative AI, from ChatGPT to those, you know, funky, cool, like Facebook profiles as me as an astronaut kind of a thing that you can do, those were trained on art and writing and stuff like that before we even knew that this was a thing, you know. I feel like that generative AI, there is a place that maybe it can be used kind of ethically in some ways for an artist, but I think it's a little too early to kind of figure it out all the way. And there is a little bit, and for me, in my industry, when cameras were becoming, when photography was becoming an art form, the painters, the art world, saw the first photographs and said, that is not art. There's no training that goes into that. You didn't spend years copying paint brush strokes and stuff like that, you know, and photographers had to fight in a way in the art world to be considered legitimate artists, you know, and now we all carry a camera in our pocket and we take 6,000 photos a week, right? You know, so there is, I don't want to be afraid of technology as it advances in the creative world, but we just need to be careful of how it's used and stuff like that. I'll say that.
Is that even going to be possible?
I don't know. I don't know. You know, and you know, it's interesting. Like the fine art world, there was someone a few years ago that originally won an art show, a juried art show, with a piece that was AI generated, and then when they found that it was AI generated, they were like, "Yeah, sorry, you did not win." So, you know, there's some guide rails going already. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you practice any discipline, or do you go through any like routine day to day that make you avid, probably force you to be more creative, or it's kind of something you do every day to force yourself? Because sometimes you don't find it, or it's kind of.
Yeah. Caffeine. Yeah, that's part of it. But so I don't know that I have something that I do on a daily basis. However, a weird, interesting thing for me is that before I start something, I need to be organized. My computer with all of my files and stuff like that is organized to like a ridiculous degree in folders and subfolders and project names and stuff like that. And a lot of times, like before I can even get started on something, I've got to put my materials in organization. You know, Adam Savage from Mythbusters. There's some of you, okay, the younger people are like, I don't know, you got to watch Mythbusters, okay? You young people, YouTube, Mythbusters, it is one of the greatest shows ever, okay?
It's really old, isn't it?
What's that?
Wasn't it a really old program?
Oh, it's from like the 2000s, so not too old, yeah. But Adam Savage is this guy who is an incredible maker and an incredible proponent of creativity and stuff. And he has this thing that he learned from a draftsman. He calls it knolling. The draft knolling, K-N-O-L-L-I-N-G. And he came to that term because he was, trying to get the story correct, it might not be exactly right, but he was working in a drafting firm. And every night, this guy, Tom Noel, can't remember his name, would go around to every draftsman's desk and align all of their pencils, right? And kind of like clean up all of their desks so like everything was arranged. So when they came into work, there was like this organized thing, and the draftsman would say like, this actually helps. And so I came to that through Legos. Anyone ever built a Lego project? Right? So Adam Savage used the example when he builds a Lego thing, and he's a model maker. Like he worked on Star Wars movies, not those, but like, yeah, he worked on like Star Wars movies. He was one of the guys that built R2-D2 for the prequel movies. Okay, for ILM. So this is the level of, yeah. And when he built a Lego, he pulls out each piece and he sorts them by shape and size on the desk before he starts building. Have you ever built a Lego? Right? And all, you know, what do? You dump out the things, and then you spend like 15 minutes going, where's that part? I can't find it. They messed it up. And then 10 minutes later, oh, there it is. Right? But like that idea of like organizing my mind a little bit, organizing my space before I like work and get creative actually does help me. In answer to your question is like,
I think it was Confucius. What is it? An organized space equals an organized mind.
could be. It could be. You know? Now, that's my neurospicy flavor. You know? Like, there are some people that just like to go on a blank page and go boom, right? There is one thing that, there's a great book, The Artist's Way, that is a classic text on just art philosophy. And one of the things that she talks about, which I haven't tried, but I'm not a morning person, so this doesn't work. But her, Beverly, I can't remember her last name, Beverly's thing is called morning pages. First thing you do when you wake up is you grab a notepad and a pencil next to your desk, and you write whatever comes, like no coffee, no nothing, don't let the dog out, just write 3 pages of whatever nonsense, happens in your brain. Remembering a dream, writing, this sucks, I'm too tired 600 times, whatever, but fill 3 pages of it. And that recommendation does something in your brain that kind of like jump starts like the creative process in a weird, interesting way. So I haven't tried that yet. I've known several creative people that have done that and they love it. They say that it really changes their brain. Until I get like half an energy drink in me, I'm too in the morning, so yeah.
It reminds me of an exercise from a book called Creative Bliss.
Uh-huh.
And there's like tons of like exercises like that. And
Yeah.
like one of them is like to write with your left hand, just like a to-do list.
Yeah.
Because it like activates your right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are so many of these little exercises that you can do like that, like using your offhand, like sketching with your offhand. How many people sketch as part of their process? Does anybody, you do a little bit? A little bit? Okay. What's that?
Chicken scratch count.
Yeah, yeah, it can. Doodles, with doodling ideas on with your offhand can be something that is really interesting as well. That change in your brain, and even if it looks like chicken scratch, because it's with your left hand. Like my left hand is like, right. It doesn't matter because it's play, right? And you're not going to edit it because your mind's visualizing something, right, as you're doing it. And even if it comes out weird, it will create that creative thought process that'll start to connect the dots, so.
I still have a question about restrictions. I
Okay.
understand that you simplify the source and the
Mhm.
elements that you force to be creative. But I was thinking of a project. Usually when we're given a project, we have brainstorm different ideas and
Mhm.
get crazy, from different perspectives and
Uh-huh.
getting so excited. But then realize, wait, CEO says that need to be this way. And then the concept market said that you have to be this way. So this is out, this is out, this is out. We cannot do it this way. So it turned out that you're not more creative. It would just limit your original imaginations because this won't fit, this won't fit. So it was like,
Yeah. Yes.
So it for me it works the opposite way.
So in brainstorming, the first stage is the Nerf ball stage, right? It's where everything goes,
Right.
And the whole idea is to like come up with something weird and new, like some of the crazy Super Bowl ads that you see, were the result of that kind of group brainstorm where people are saying, what if we had frogs that could talk? And saying, Budweiser, right? Someone said that probably as a joke, right? And then all of a sudden it becomes like this huge Super Bowl ad, right? So the first step is no editing, right? But once you get that all out, then the step is to then refine it. And that's also where like the restrictions come in too. Like you can have a really out there idea, but okay, maybe our demographic is X and we need to take this and maybe refine it to hit that demographic, maybe we need to take, maybe the limitation is, based on budget. Sometimes that's a real thing that we have to find creativity in is with budgets and stuff like that. So the initial process of playing and then giving yourself also restrictions to play in the sandbox, right, is for the creative development. And then once you have like that base idea, then it becomes an engineering problem, right? How can I take this weird thing and turn it into something, right? So yeah, there's two phases to that. And then sometimes you got to go back to the old drawing board, as Bugs Bunny would say, you know, and do it again. Like I said, like 50 logo versions, and then I did another bunch of however many, right? You know, so sometimes that happens. All right. Any other questions?
I have one.
Yes.
So architectural photography is
Yeah.
super precise,
Yes.
very persnickety. And if you guys aren't familiar with architectural photography, it's not quick. How do you? What's your version of like saying, you know, I'm just gonna throw caution to the wind and just be a little crazy? Is that where your art kind of comes from, or do you ever just kind of just say, you know what, I'm just gonna do
I was going to
something
pull up
just crazy?
my website. So the process becomes, it's a limiting factor, right? And so that's where the creative juice, because there's restrictions. I have to shoot this space in a certain way. Let me, I'll just connect to my iPhone. Here we go. Which side are we on here? Here we go. Yeah, okay, so this is the kind of photography that we're talking about is, where's my cursor? You know, homes, skyscrapers, that's a drone shot there. So the process then becomes in things like composition, color, lighting. Lighting is a big thing. And then another part is my clients want to tell a story, right? And I need to figure out how I can visually tell that story in this space. Is it about, this is a lobby of a hotel in GR. If you've been to Grand Rapids, you might recognize that building as you come over up 131, right? It's looking at the space. There's a lot of again, there's a lot of this iterations of back and forth. I did a shoot this morning with a client on a remodel, and it's funny, it's like a lot of times like the small shots are the hardest ones. Is a basement remodel of this, one of those rich lake houses, right? And they have a little bourbon corner thing with lights in it that they built under the stairs, right, with little glass, and it was very cool. But it was like, all right, we ended up doing 3 different shots trying to capture it. We're like, all right, we're gonna go onto this side. I don't know if that shows or around here a little bit. And so then the creative problem solving comes out of like, it's about angles, it's about lighting, and there's a lot of technical restrictions like inside light versus outside light, different color temperatures. All right, there's a technical problem solving process I have to go through to balance those lights so the inside lights don't look too orange, and then sometimes it is all about just like, finding something cool, what's the right angle to show this cool thing in. Yeah, does that answer your question, kind of?
I kind of meant like, since this is so precise,
Mm-hmm.
do you ever just say, screw it, yes, I've been precise all day long, I'm just gonna do something crazy for myself?
That's when I do the
That's where you're.
yeah. But a lot of times, what can be fun is the details, like details in buildings, and looking at like kind of picturing it in geometry, in a way. So, and a lot of times, architects, a lot of times will build in like some really interesting lines and shapes, and then on the interiors, like really great designers that work with color and texture. Sometimes it's really fun to go in and do like a tight shot with like out of focus background on a piece in the foreground of a design, some piece of furniture or something, and let the color in the background go, So for some of that, it's like I let go of like the very, precise things. I let the focus go a lot of times. And I will get in, because you look at all of these things, I shoot normally with a 12 millimeter wide lens on a APC sensor. So it's pretty wide, And so getting in tight with like a 35 or even a 50 millimeter lens on some little detail of something kind of takes this kind of stuff and puts it into a new light too. So, yeah, challenge myself with a different lens restriction. Okay, anything else? All right, thank you so much for coming. I really enjoyed you. Thank you.